I'm still waiting for my Captain Beefheart moment too.
Well, I might be able to help you with that.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a my secret Captain Beefheart album is strictly personal. Have you heard that?
No, I don't know if I have.
That would be the one to check out. That'd be one to check out. Strictly personal. It's one that Beefheart hated. It was one that was produced without his involvement. He did that. He recorded the songs and went away, and the producer produced it, and it's wonderful. It's wonderful. And Beefheart hated it. But that's the one I think, especially in the modern era. I mean, Trout Mask Replica's too much to ask people, I think, to appreciate these days. But
well, that I definitely can't stand that album. I've tried.
Yeah, it separates one group of people from the other. That one, it really does. You've got to. I don't know how I could persuade someone to like that if they didn't like it.
That's what bugs me, is because I'm the kind of guy that likes all the music, even the most offensive music. I usually enjoy. So I don't know what it is about Trout Mask that I don't know. And it's weird. You're right. Like, anytime someone tries to tell me something amazing about the album, I find myself less liking it. Like when they're like, oh, they weren't allowed to eat food and they all lived in this one house and they were.
Don Van Vliet was horrible to them. It's one of the things that, I mean, I love Zappa and I love Beefheart, but you've got to accept that both were horrible people in their own way to different people. And Beefheart was an absolute pig to his musicians. And if you said to me, I've got a choice, I can either have that album in the world, or those guys can get that year of their life back to live a normal life, I would say take your life back, because it's not worth it it's not worth it to make an album. Beefheart treated them appallingly, and Beefheart had almost nothing to do with the making of that album. It was all John French, the
really?
drummer who could score music. And Beefheart sat down at a piano and just hammered out stuff on the piano, and John French did his faithful best as a young acolyte of the great guru to bring these things to life. But Beefheart didn't have a clue what he was doing. Beefheart couldn't remember his own lyrics. He couldn't remember his own parts. He had no idea. He relied heavily on the people round about him to tell him what was going on. He was one of these guys who was just mostly out of it all the time, whether on drugs or whether because of his personality. But he was famous for, I mean, he blew off Woodstock. He was supposed to play at Woodstock, but he didn't do it, and that's why Ry Cooder left, because Beefheart took a flaky, because he knew he would forget the lyrics and fuck up and all that kind of stuff. So really sad. But I think the album's a flawed masterpiece, and there's a great piece of footage from the Beat Club in Germany of Beefheart and his band playing, and they play some of the songs off later material. It's absolutely incendiary. That band, when they were playing, were absolutely incredible. I mean, they were doing stuff that was, the syncopation and it looks. I played it to a friend of mine who was skeptical about it, and he was like, "They're just making it up as they go along." And I said, well, no, they're not actually. That's believe it or not, that's all scored. It's all scored. The drummer's a classically trained percussionist. He's not playing from making it up. He's remembering the parts. They're all remembering the parts, which is astonishing, really. But the later band that Roy Estrada was in, the talk about your heroes letting you down. But Roy Estrada, he was the bass player in that version of the band that you can see on the Beat Club thing. It's great. And Beefheart is just a presence. He's a presence. I can understand why people sort of gravitated towards him. And in those days of the 60s, all the legends about Beefheart, that he would answer the phone before it rang. He would get up and reach out to the phone, and then it would ring and he would answer it. All stuff like that. Bullshit, of course. That he was connected to this, this magical world, and he played on that. Did you know, as a boy, he used to go up into the hills behind Lancaster, which was in the Mojave Desert. He used to go into the hills when he had a cold, when he got one of these colds that young people get all the time, and his voice was like that. He would go and scream in the wilderness to get the voice that he ended up with.
Really? He
made his own voice because that's the way he wanted to sound. So he went into the hills and screamed. He was a childhood prodigy. He was a sculptor as a child. He got his stuff on telly and stuff. I don't think any of the things exist. And of course, after his music career, became a very successful abstract painter. So he was a genuine genius, but he was also a horrible, horrible person to people around about him. And why they remained loyal to him, I do not know, because he abused them horribly. And of course, Frank Zappa produced Trout Mash Replica and slept through most of it, according to John French. So that great connection between the great minds was never really happened. Zappa was just bored by the whole thing.
I can see why too.
I can see why. That's sacrilege. You can't say that. That's Trout Mash Replica. That's one of the greatest albums ever made, man. How many times have you heard that? We're having that discussion. One of the greatest albums ever. Well, it is if you get it, but if you don't get it, it's one of the worst albums ever made.
Well, and one of the things that made it really hard for me to enjoy it was when I first heard the, what are they called? The Shaggs.
Oh God, right? Yes.
They're apparently brilliant too, right? But they sound just about as brilliant as Trout Mass to me.
It's the same thing though. They composed that shit that you hear, the awfulness of it, which is what's so attractive about it. They composed that. It wasn't that they were performing it badly. That's the way. Because there's a guy who, oh God, I can't remember. I think I've talked about it before with you. There's a guy who does covers of the Shaggs stuff, but he does it in tune and in time. But he uses the funny timings that they came up with. But he performs it well. Oh, it's like music from Venus. It really is. It's like music from somewhere else. It's fantastic. Nice. They had this great idea, but they had no idea how to bring it into fruition. They're a fantastic story about that lot of the Shaggs.
Yeah.
The father wanting them to, be pop stars because he had a dream or something. Christ on a bike.
Well, I think it was what was it? Wasn't it like his mother was a psychic, or his psychic told him about his?
Yes, he got a psychic reading that said that his girls would be pop stars.
Yeah.
you can't make it up. And then he brought somebody in to teach them how to play the instruments, and that was all they knew about music. That was all they knew. They didn't know anything about pop music. They had no idea. They didn't listen to it. They weren't allowed to listen to it. Wow. Yeah. It's funny, isn't it? Out of those two horrendous situations, the Captain Beefheart house, where those musicians were horribly treated, and the same with the girls, coming home from school and going straight into the basement to rehearse their music, and that was all they were allowed to do. Out of those two horrendous situations come these, in inverted commas, horrendous albums, which actually over time become more and more interesting as you realise how unique they actually were. There's no comparison to those two. You can only compare them to one another because there isn't anything else like them. It's amazing. Yeah. It's amazing.